Hey guys, Ryan Smith of the Ryan Smith Home Selling Team here to discuss today a little bit more about closing costs. How much are closing costs? How much do buyers pay in closing costs? How much do sellers pay in closing costs? When are they paid? You know, all the good 411. So let's dive right in. So over the last few weeks, we've been reaching out to a lot of you guys to pick your brains and hear what are some of the questions that you guys have about the real estate industry. And so one of those topics that kept coming up that people would like to hear a little bit more about is about closing costs. You know, what are they? Who pays them? When are they paid? That sort of thing. So first off, let's just start off with defining what are closing costs. Closing costs generally are expenses that are incurred to close a real estate transaction. So let's discuss, what are buyers' closing costs and what are the seller's closing costs? So buyers' closing costs are typically the expenses that a lender is charging to close a transaction. And I shouldn't say that's all the expenses that are in a buyer's closing cost, but that's the majority. The majority of buyers' closing cost expenses are typically put out by a lender in order to close a transaction. So a couple examples of what buyer's closing costs would be. Easy example would be like a loan origination fee that a lender is charging to do the loan, a fee for running credit report, a fee to underwrite and process everything, right? If there's an appraisal being done, certainly a fee for an appraisal. So these are great examples of fees from a lender. A lender would also likely require them to put an escrow deposit up, which is considered part of the closing costs. That would be 2 to 3 months of prepaid taxes and insurance. This is probably the majority of the closing costs for a buyer. And then the buyer has one or two things that are closing costs that are not paid at closing. They're paid a little bit up front. Typically, those are your inspections. That's going to be like a home inspection or a pest inspection, just any kind of inspection that you want to have done up front on the house before you get to the closing day. And normally those are, a few $100s or so that are paid up front. For the seller, typically we're going to tell folks that theirs are going to run about 8.25%. So what is 8.25%? Where does that come from? Well, you're going to have realtors fees, and then you're going to have some title policy fees, right? So there's going to be a fee to obtain a title policy. There's going to be recording fees with the county. There's going to be some attorney's fees as the attorneys are drafting documents to sign. And those things, when you add them all together, real estate fees, attorney's fees, title fees, even you could include paying for the prorated taxes for the current year in which you're selling the house. That could be included in that too. Generally, you're going to run around 8.25% there. So, and again, for the seller, none of those fees for the seller are actually paid prior to closing. So all those are generally paid at the closing day of closing, at the closing date. So now that said, people a lot of times ask, well, what is the typical, who typically, does the seller ever pay any of the buyer's closing costs? Do the buyers just pay it all themselves? That's a very complicated question to answer, in certain price ranges. So certainly as you go down into more entry-level home prices, the seller may end up paying a lot of the closing costs. As we move up in price range, it may not happen quite as often. So when a seller asks me that question, generally my answer will be that it's all market dependent. It's all market driven. So that, if you have a lot of demand for your house when you list it, you're probably not going to have to, as a seller, pay a lot towards the buyer's closing. So if you're a buyer and you're competing with 3 or 4 other offers, you may end up paying more of your own closing costs. And if you're a buyer and you're buying a property that's been on the market for a long time, so in other words, there's not as much demand on that property, you might be able to get the seller to pay a larger percentage of your closing costs, which is the exact same thing we would tell the seller. Hey, Mr. Seller, if your house hasn't sold and it's been on the market for 4 or 5 months, you're probably going to have to pay a larger percentage of the buyer's closing costs. So who pays what is oftentimes very market dependent. For most of you watching this video, you live in the state of Texas just like I do. We actually, I don't know if it's blessed or probably not blessed with, that most studies have shown that Texas has the highest closing costs in the nation. And then ironically, a lot of places have shown that the state of Nevada actually has the lowest closing costs in the nation. How to actually figure out what those costs are before the closing date, that's another question that we've certainly heard. The best way is to talk to your real estate agent or talk to your lender if you're a buyer. And they can normally give you a pretty good idea of what those expenses are going to look like. Hope that's been very helpful. If you have any other questions about this topic or any others, please feel free to reach out. It is our pleasure to serve you. Check us out on the website. That's ryansmithhomes.com. Looking to buy or sell in the Central Texas area, we've got your back. Hope you're having a great day. We'll talk to you soon.